I'll never forget the sound of my own teeth chattering that night, not from sickness, but from the bitter Pennsylvania cold seeping through the metal of my old Ford. I'm 70 years old, and instead of falling asleep under the roof I spent 40 years building, I was curled up in the driver's seat, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled faintly of motor oil. I pressed my hand against the frosted window, and through the thin layer of ice I could see the glow of lights in the distance. My house, my home, the place where my wife and I raised our boy. Only it wasn't quiet anymore. The bass from a stereo thumped in my chest, even from 2 blocks away. My son and his wife were throwing another party in there, strangers drinking expensive whiskey, stomping their boots on the hardwood floors I sanded down with my own hands, laughing under the roof I paid for with decades of sweat and busted knuckles. I was out here, my breath turning into small clouds in the air, while my house had become a playground for people who didn't even know my name. I thought back to the day I signed the paper that added my son's name to the deed. It was supposed to be a gesture of trust, a way to make sure the house stayed in the family. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and coffee, and I remember telling myself, this is what a good father does. I never imagined that piece of paper would be the reason I now carried a thermos of lukewarm coffee just to keep from freezing to death. It's strange how betrayal doesn't come in one loud bang. It drips, slow and steady, like water seeping through a crack until the foundation rots. First, my son asked if he and his wife could stay for a while after he lost his job. I said yes, of course. Family helps family. Then he started moving furniture around, telling me it was for the baby they'd have someday. I swallowed my pride and let him. Next, he changed the locks. He swore it was just for safety because the neighborhood had gotten rough. And like a fool, I believed him. The real slap in the face came when I returned from the grocery store one afternoon, bags heavy with canned soup and bread, and found myself standing on my own porch with a key that no longer worked. My son leaned against the doorframe, holding a beer, and told me I should take a break and give them space. That was the night I first slept in the car. As I sat in that freezing Ford, I kept asking myself, when did my boy turn into a stranger? I paid for his college. I sold my tools to cover his wedding. I held his hand when his mother passed and promised I'd always stand by him. And now he wouldn't even stand by me long enough to let me inside the house I built for him. The cold pressed harder, and I started the engine for a few minutes just to warm my bones. Gas was almost $5 a gallon in Pittsburgh, and I couldn't afford to waste it, but I was desperate. That's when a car pulled up behind me. For a split second, I thought maybe it was my son coming to check on me. Instead, a group of young people stumbled out, carrying cases of beer, laughing, and headed toward my house. One of them pointed at me and asked his buddy, "Who's that old man sitting in the car?" His buddy shrugged. "Probably some homeless guy." That word, homeless, hit me harder than the cold. Homeless. Under my own roof, I had become invisible. I couldn't take it anymore. I climbed out of the Ford, my knees stiff, and shuffled toward the house. The front door was wide open, music pouring out, lights flickering like a nightclub. I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking the way it always had. Only this time, it felt like I was trespassing. My heart pounded as I raised my fist and knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door swung open, and a young man I'd never seen before, face flushed with alcohol, looked me up and down. He smelled of cheap cologne and beer. He squinted and asked, "Who the hell are you?" I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Who was I? The man who built this houseboard by board? The father who gave up everything for the son inside? Or just the old fool left out in the cold? The music behind him grew louder. Laughter, glasses clinking, the sound of my son's voice echoing through the hall. My own house, my own blood, and I was standing there like an outsider, waiting for permission to step in. And in that moment, I realized something that made my chest tighten. This wasn't just about being left outside for the night. This was about being erased, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me in the home I thought would carry my family's legacy. The young man smirked, leaned against the doorframe, and said again, slower this time, I asked you, who are you supposed to be? I clenched my fists, the cold air burning in my lungs, and I finally found my voice. But what I was about to say would change everything. I stared at that drunk kid blocking the doorway, his smirk making the blood pound in my ears. I didn't answer his question right away. I just stepped past him. The smell of spilled beer and cheap perfume hit me like a slap. My living room, the one where my wife used to sew quilts in the evenings, was a mess of red plastic cups, empty pizza boxes, and cigarette smoke curling up to the ceiling. Music blasted from a Bluetooth speaker sitting on top of my old oak cabinet, the same cabinet I had built when Michael was still in high school. Now it was covered in sticky rings from beer cans, and there he was, my son. Michael stood near the fireplace, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. He wore a button-up shirt I had bought him years ago for job interviews, now half unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up like he was some kind of host at a nightclub. When he saw me, his smile froze, then twisted into something I had never thought I'd see on my own child's face, annoyance. Dad, what are you doing here? His voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. The room went quieter, people turning to watch. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was, this is my house. He didn't even flinch. He walked toward me, beer in hand, and put his arm around my shoulder in a way that felt more like control than affection. He steered me toward the door as if I were some embarrassing guest who had overstayed his welcome. Dad, you're tired. You should go rest. We've got people over the betrayal cut deep. But what he whispered next nearly stopped my heart. You don't live here anymore. I froze. What did you just say? He pulled back, smirking like the kid at the door. Dad, you signed the papers. Remember, the house isn't just yours. It's ours. And right now, we're using it. People chuckled nervously, sipping their drinks, watching a father be humiliated by his own son. One woman whispered, Is he serious? That's his dad? My son pretended not to hear. I looked around. The photographs of our family that once lined the mantel had been taken down. In their place, someone had taped up neon party flyers. The rocking chair where my wife once cradled Michael as a baby was shoved into the corner, a pile of coats tossed on top of it. I wanted to shout, to remind him of everything I had given. But before I could, his wife, Jessica, appeared at his side. She crossed her arms and said, Maybe you should let us have our space. You've had this house your whole life. Isn't it time you move on? Her words echoed in my head like a gavel hitting wood. Move on from the house I built, from the memories of my wife, from the only anchor I had left. I turned toward Michael, searching his face for some sign of the boy I raised. Instead, he glanced at his friends, shrugged, and said, Yeah, Dad, you should probably find somewhere else to stay for a while. It's just easier for everyone. A chill ran deeper than the winter air outside. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, pulled one out, and tried the lock on the front door to prove a point. It didn't fit. He had changed the locks. I staggered back, my stomach twisting. He had planned this. Piece by piece, he had been pushing me out. The new locks, the missing family photos, the parties. It wasn't just neglect. It was a takeover. The room blurred, a mix of laughter and music, and my own fury boiling under the surface. I wanted to fight, to reclaim what was mine. But all I managed was to whisper, You'll regret this. Michael's face hardened, his jaw tightening. No, Dad, you will. I walked back to my car, my body shaking, not from the cold this time, but from rage I could barely contain. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dark outline of the house, and for the first time in my life, I thought about what it meant to strike back. That's when my hand brushed against the glove compartment. I opened it, searching for tissues, but instead my fingers landed on something else. The manila folder I had shoved in there years ago. Inside was a copy of the deed, the one the lawyer had drawn up when I added Michael's name. My heart started pounding as I read the fine print under the dome light. The house wasn't his the way he thought it was. Buried in the legal language was a clause giving me lifetime residency. No one, not even my son, could force me out. I sat back, breath fogging the glass, the first spark of hope flickering inside me. The betrayal had cut deep, but the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as I looked back at my house glowing with party lights, I smiled for the first time in weeks, because what Michael didn't know was about to destroy everything he thought he had taken from me. I sat in the car for a long time that night, the folders spread open across the steering wheel, my hands trembling as I traced each line of that deed. Lifetime residency. Those two words burned into my mind like a brand. My son thought he'd shoved me out for good, but legally he hadn't. The house was still mine to live in until the day I died. It was a small clause, probably something he skimmed over when we signed it. But to me, it was the thin thread between despair and survival. The next morning, I drove downtown to the Allegheny County Courthouse. The air smelled of wet asphalt and salt from the plows, my boots crunching over the icy sidewalk. Inside, the marble halls echoed with the shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. I felt out of place, an old man with cracked hands and a thrift store coat, but I walked straight to the records office and requested the full deed file. When the clerk slid it across the counter, I read it twice. Slow, deliberate. There it was in black and white. I still had a foothold. That discovery should have brought me peace. Instead, it stoked something darker. I thought about all the nights I spent in that freezing car while strangers guzzled liquor in my living room. I thought about Jessica's smirk when she told me to move on. I thought about Michael looking me dead in the eye and saying I didn't live there anymore. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was personal, raw, intentional. I started watching the house from a distance, parking a block away. At first, I just wanted to see if the parties continued. They did. Cars lined the street, headlights flickering through the snow. Music blared at all hours. But the more I watched, the more I noticed details that didn't add up. People carried in cases of beer and bottles of bourbon, but I also saw Michael handing out envelopes. One night, I spotted a man I recognized from the bar district, someone who'd been arrested years ago for running an illegal gambling ring. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just parties. My son was turning my home into a front for something else. I knew I needed proof, so I swallowed my pride and asked a neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, if her security camera caught the street. She was in her 80s, kind-hearted, and she'd always looked out for me. Over tea in her cluttered kitchen, she pulled up the footage on her laptop, and there it was. Cars pulling up at 2 a.m, men leaving with envelopes, sometimes even boxes. Not just kids partying. It was business. Shady business. I copied the files onto a thumb drive and thanked her, my mind spinning. The pieces were coming together. My son hadn't just betrayed me as a father. He was risking everything I had built, everything my wife and I had worked for, by dragging that house into criminal hands. I decided to confront him, not to beg this time, but to test him. One Saturday afternoon, when the snow had started melting into muddy slush, I walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell. Michael answered, his eyes bloodshot, hair messy. Behind him, the living room reeked of stale beer and smoke. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he asked flatly. "I'm here because I know what you're doing," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This isn't just about parties anymore, is it?" For a split second, his face twitched, and that was all the confirmation I needed. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "You're imagining things? You're old. You don't understand." But I did understand, and he knew I understood. His wife appeared behind him, her arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the problem. "Richard," she said coldly, "you're embarrassing yourself. You should leave before things get ugly." I looked them both in the eyes, then leaned close enough for only them to hear. "You forgot about the deed. You forgot I still belong here. And now I know what you're really doing." Michael's smirk faltered. His wife's lips tightened. I turned and walked away before they could answer, my boots crunching against the frozen ground. Every step felt heavier, but also steadier. Back in the car, I pulled out the thumb drive, gripping it like a weapon. Proof. The kind of proof that could ruin him. But a question gnawed at me. Was I willing to destroy my own son to save myself? Neighbors would see. Police would get involved. His life, his reputation. It would all collapse. Some people would say that's justice. Others would say a father should never go that far, no matter the betrayal. That night, as I lay back in the driver's seat, staring at the ceiling of my car, the answer began to form in my chest. If he was willing to erase me, then maybe it was time I erased the version of him I thought I knew. And just as that thought settled, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. A voice on the other end said, "Mr. Hayes, this is First Commonwealth Bank. We need to speak with you about a loan in your name. It appears your son signed some documents without your consent." My grip tightened around the phone. "Mr. Hayes, the loan is in default. If you don't act soon, the bank will move to foreclose on the property." The line went quiet, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat in that parking lot, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The banker's words echoed in my ears. Default, foreclosure, documents in my name. My own son hadn't just humiliated me, he had tried to bury me in debt. For the first time in months, my anger cut through the fog of shame. My heart pounded like a drum, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from resolve. The next morning, I put on my old wool coat, the one my wife used to patch at the elbows, and walked into the First Commonwealth branch downtown. The air inside smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. A young loan officer greeted me with a smile that faded as soon as I slid the folder across her desk. "I never signed this loan," I said, my voice low and steady. She frowned, flipping through the documents. "But it's notarized, Mr. Hayes." "Your signature is right here." I leaned forward, pointing at the paper. "I rebuilt engines for 40 years. My hands don't write like that anymore. Look close. That's not my signature." Her eyes narrowed. She compared the scrawl on the loan papers to my driver's license. Then she picked up the phone and called her manager. Within minutes, I was in a glass-walled office, facing two bankers and a stack of files. They tried to be polite, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Fraud wasn't just my son's problem, it was theirs too. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I simply told the truth, piece by piece, like fitting bolts back into an engine. The deed, the clause about lifetime residency, the footage from Mrs. Caldwell's camera. By the time I was done, their faces had drained of color. "Mr. Hayes," the manager finally said, "if what you're saying is true, your son committed fraud by signing these documents without your knowledge. That voids his right to borrow against the house." It felt like a weight shifting in my chest. For once the law was on my side, but the twist came faster than I expected. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail slot at the P.O. box I still kept. It was from the bank, addressed to both me and Michael. The words punched me in the gut. Meeting required to discuss foreclosure alternatives. Michael must have gotten his copy too, because the next evening he stormed into the parking lot where I was sitting in my car. His breath smoked in the frigid air, his fists clenched. "What the hell did you do, Dad?" he hissed. "The bank called me. They said you're fighting the loan. Do you have any idea what's at stake?" I looked him in the eye, calm for the first time in months. "Everything you tried to take from me." His face twisted, a mix of panic and fury. "If you keep pushing this, you'll drag us both down." Jessica and I could lose everything. I almost laughed. Us both. He still thought of it as his house, his life, his right. I let him rant, let him spit his venom, until finally I said, "I'm done sleeping in my car while you destroy the only home your mother ever knew. You wanted me erased, but I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment he realized the ground beneath him was shifting. He tried to bluster, but I saw it in his eyes. Fear. The following week we sat across from each other in the bank's conference room. The bankers laid everything out: the fraudulent signatures, the unpaid debt, the legal clause protecting me. Jessica kept her head down, twisting her wedding ring. Michael's leg bounced under the table, his face pale. Then came the real twist. The manager slid a final document across the table. If we proceed, Mr. Hayes retains his right to live in the property until death. However, if the loan remains unpaid, foreclosure will proceed after his passing. Unless, of course, Mr. Hayes chooses another arrangement. The words rang in my ears like a bell. For the first time, I saw a path not just to survival, but to justice. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and looked directly at my son. Maybe it's time this house stopped being a curse for both of us. He blinked, confused. Jessica glanced up, eyes wide. I smiled, not kindly but cold, the way steel shines under a shop light. I have a new will, and the two of you aren't in it. The room went dead silent. Michael's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man who'd just been handed a death sentence he never saw coming. The bankers exchanged a glance, realizing this meeting was no longer about money alone. And as I pushed back my chair and stood, I dropped the real bombshell. I've already found someone else who'll inherit this house. Someone who actually deserves it. I walked out before he could respond, leaving his jaw hanging and Jessica staring after me in horror. But the truth was, I hadn't told him who. Not yet. And that secret, who I had chosen, was the one card that could destroy him completely. I didn't sleep the night after that meeting. I sat in the car with the heater running low, staring at the house I had built board by board. Michael and Jessica's silhouettes moved behind the curtains, pacing, arguing. They didn't know who I'd chosen, and that uncertainty gnawed at them harder than any words I could have said. The next week, the bank called both of us in again, this time to finalize paperwork. The conference room felt colder, more serious. The manager shuffled a stack of files, then turned to me. Mr. Hayes, have you made your decision on the inheritance clause? I nodded. My voice was steady. Yes. The house will be transferred upon my death to the Allegheny Veterans Support Foundation. My grandson, Daniel, will have access to a scholarship fund in his name. Michael and Jessica will receive nothing. The silence that followed was almost sweet. Michael's face drained of color, his mouth falling open like a man about to drown. Jessica slammed her palm on the table, whispering, "You can't do this," but I could, and I had. The manager slid the notarized papers across the table. I signed them with a firm stroke of the pen, the sound echoing louder in my ears than any gavel. When it was done, I set the pen down and looked straight at my son. All those nights I slept in my car, all those winters you locked me out while strangers drank under this roof. You thought I was powerless, but you forgot who taught you to stand. You forgot I've been standing my whole life. For the first time since this nightmare began, Michael couldn't look me in the eye. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. His wife muttered something about leaving, but he didn't move. The weight of shame had finally crushed the arrogance out of him. That night, I walked back into my house. My house. The air still reeked faintly of smoke and spilled beer, but beneath it I caught something else. The faint smell of the cedar beams I had sanded years ago. The scent of home still clinging stubbornly beneath the wreckage. I ran my hand along the banister, scarred from countless moves, and I felt something loosen inside me. The justice wasn't just in the paperwork or the signatures. It was in reclaiming the life I refused to let anyone erase. Weeks later, the parties stopped. The cars no longer crowded the street. Neighbors nodded at me with a respect I hadn't felt in years. And Michael, well, word got around about the fraud, about the loan, about the inheritance he'd lost. He still lived in town, but the whispers followed him everywhere. The proud man who thought he could outsmart his own father had become a cautionary tale at the very bar where he once bragged. I sat alone in the kitchen one evening, the clock ticking steady, and finally let out a breath that seemed like it had been trapped in my chest since the day my wife died. It wasn't joy, not really. It was something quieter, deeper, closure. Looking back, the lesson is simple but sharp. Love and trust can blind you if you hand them over without boundaries. I thought sacrifice was enough to hold a family together. I was wrong. Sometimes you need to draw the line before the people you love turn your kindness into a weapon. And now, as I finish telling this, I wonder, have you ever faced a betrayal that cut you so deep you had to find strength you didn't know you had? If you have, share it in the comments. I'd like to hear your story. And if you want to walk with me through more stories like this, don't forget to stay with the channel, because no one should ever feel alone in their fight for justice.